live on Instagram.
All right, everybody. It's tequila time. And you can tell by my voice I'm already into it. So recall last week we ended by walking through this den, and we promised this week I would talk a little bit about the books that populate this den. But I also want to reintroduce, from the first time we've done this, Parimal. Parimal's a good friend of mine. Parimal, what's your last name?
My last name is Deshpande. Can you
Okay, so
that?
no, I can't. So it's just Parimal.
Just Parimal is fine.
Just by introduction, Parimal and I have known each other for 10 years.
Plus 10 plus.
Director of marketing for Xbox at Microsoft. But this is not connected in any way, shape, or form to Microsoft. It's just letting them know that you're not a criminal or out on work release. Is that true?
I think that is hopefully true. I try not to do criminal activities.
Hanging out with me is suspect enough, I guess.
Yes, no, I'm just here because, I'm nowhere as good a photographer as you, but I'm an avid photographer, and known you for a long time. I have, like your audience, I'm a huge fan of your work, and I'm inspired by your work.
Okay,
so it's a privilege for me.
No, it sounds like a pitch. Do you notice anything different about me this week, actually?
That you're very happy right now.
I'm very happy. I'm wearing long sleeves.
That's good.
The girls in the office said, I'm driving the women and a few men crazy with my biceps. Okay, we know that's not true. All right, so listen, about this den. When I moved into this house in 1986, it was a bar. Back in the 50s, I think people made bars in their house. So it was dark wood paneling. There was a green vinyl wet bar over here. And so that's one of the first things I changed, was had a friend, architect friend of mine, design these shelves that were deep enough to hold what became my library. So these books, and I think we figured out there must be about 500 books in this den. I've organized them, otherwise it takes me, especially if I've drank tequila, it takes me a long time to find a book. And so they are really organized by geographic area or by specific subjects. For instance, over here, it's called Primitive Cultures. So all of these are beautiful big books on New Guinea cultures, African cultures, so forth and so on. You can hear Gabriel in the background. We introduced Gabriel as the tequila maker, but also he's talking to his family back in Thailand.
So quick question, Art, and while we maintain our 6 feet distance,
yes.
Because I know that is important to your audience, so we don't make you sick.
Yeah,
that's important. So while we keep that, can you explain a little bit about why primitive cultures? Actually, let me take a step back. Why even books? Why books?
Hold on, just 1 second. Gabriel.
This is an
This
evidence
is live
that
TV.
This is live TV. This is live TV.
Gabriel, be quiet. Okay. 27 years we've worked together. He's really into this show. You can tell he's talking to his wife. Anyway, why books?
Yeah.
I mean, as opposed to what else? I mean, paintings or whatever you mean. We're live right here. We can hear you talking. We could hear every word you were saying. Go make
This
more
is
tequila.
part of the script, everyone. This is awesome.
At any rate, that's a dumb question anyway. So let's get on with these things.
Okay.
It's not a dumb question. It's just I don't have an answer for it.
Keep thinking. And primitive cultures. You were saying primitive cultures.
I mean, and what's amazing about it is you can go back in time. Like, this is a really old book by Leni Riefenstahl, who actually photographed the Olympics when it was in Berlin. And after a long career working for the Germans during the unsavory epoch in their history, she actually went to Africa and started photographing cultures. So a beautiful book on African cultures, which I'm sure, though I can't confirm right now, that Angela Fisher and Carol Beckwith, who have done amazing work in Africa on ceremonies and adornment, which inspired me early on in my career. And so I think that's a pretty good message right there. People inspire other people, and that really answers your bigger question. Why all these books? I derive inspiration from all the books I've got in my gallery, in my library. So every one of these books I paid personally for, and I bought them because I needed to do research, and most of these actually predate the internet. So if you wanted to know about Sumatra or Indonesia, you couldn't get on the internet. You just wound up buying a book on it, and that you educated yourself over time.
That's cool. So sounds like this is all organized, since you aren't traveling right now, by regions and places.
Right. And a lot of them, quite honestly, like for instance, here we call monographs. These are friends of mine and or people that I know that have inspired me over the years. Many of them are contemporary colleagues. Eric Miola, Franz Lanting's here, Sam Abel, Jim Brandenburg, Tom, okay.
Mangelson,
thank you. Good friend of mine, but you know, a 68-year-old brain has some
You're welcome,
short-term
Art.
memories. Huh?
You're welcome. Okay, let me ask you this question.
Yeah.
If and when, and this is a serious question, do not laugh. If I ever publish a book, would you keep it? And second question, would you actually buy it?
Probably not.
Thank you so much for your honest candor.
Of course I would do that. What a dumbass question in front of a big audience. At any rate, so yeah, they're in geographic areas. This one is all on the Himalaya. There's Japan, China. All of this over here is Europe. North America's down there. Africa's up in there. So yeah, I organize these books. And once you believe it, look at there's shelf space for more books in the future.
I have an idea. We have someone dial in from Pakistan.
Yes.
So, Deja Vu Photography, hello from Pakistan. This one is for you. Do you have any books from Pakistan? If not, that stuff goes to Pakistan.
I do.
Oh, you do? Okay.
It would be over in the Asia area, India, Pakistan. You look while I'm sitting. But yeah, Pakistan, I've been twice. I've been up in the Kunjarat Pass. The first time I went to Pakistan was in 1990. I was working on a book called Light on the Land. And so I went through Western China, up over the Kunjarat Pass, down into the Hunza Valley of Pakistan, and then exited through Gilgit, Islamabad. I went back, handful of years later, went into Islamabad, into Skardu, and went up with Gabrielle to K2. So Pakistan is very much a beautiful country, and I've enjoyed being there.
One question we have from your fans is from Vandana. Are all your books about art?
You know, that's subjective, right? Some books are about art, others are about geographical regions, which wouldn't necessarily fall under the category of art. All the books I've bought are largely because I enjoy looking at them. You know, I spend an inordinate amount of time on those rare occasions when I'm home, sitting right there with my light on, having a glass of wine, and just feeling a book, feeling the paper of the book, the craft of making really beautiful books. And ever since I was an art student, books have been a real strong draw from me. Obviously, if I've worked over 100 books in my career, books are a big deal for me.
Okay. People want to see your biceps, but we'll leave that for the next episode, I think.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's nothing there. This dog doesn't hunt right there.
Since I'm Indian, I got to ask you, how about India? Like, you have a whole section on India?
No, why would I?
India.
You set me up for such great questions. Yeah, India where is India? Right over in there.
It's right here, I can see.
There are probably about 15 books on India right there.
That's awesome. Well, obviously the question is, I mean, you said you have 500 plus books.
Yeah.
What are your, it's probably a hard question, but I'm going to ask it anyways. What about your top 10 right now?
Well,
with some tequila.
Coincidentally. I have some right here on the table. So I kind of planned on you asking that question. And I should say that these books are not all the most beautiful books I've ever seen, but they have historical significance or there's a personal connection. So these aren't like the most beautiful books ever made, although some of them are. One book, which doesn't even have a cover because I think I bought it from Amazon as a triple used book, is called The Creation by Ernst Haas. And I might have mentioned this in the previous couple of weeks, but this book was a landmark book for Franz Lanting and myself and Tom Mangelson, Jim Brandenburg. It's a book that was probably very early in the 35 millimeter age. Prior to that, photographers like Ansel Adams and Edward Weston were using large format books, and suddenly the 35 millimeter came along, which made getting out into the wilds and shooting much more spontaneously available to photographers like Ernst, which passed it on to people like me a few years later. Galen Rowell just ahead of me. So the 35 millimeter really became that usable tool for wildlife, for cultures, for traveling into the Himalayas. And so The Creation is a beautiful book. Obviously, it's connected to religion, but anyhow, it doesn't matter to me. It's a beautiful book.
That's number 10, Creation, okay.
You like to put numbers
I
on
like
things.
to, I mean, I'm a marketing guy.
You are a marketing guy.
10 to 1.
And I'm an artist, and
You're an artist,
therefore...
and you don't care about marketing people. I get it. Move on. Number 9.
Explorations is a beautiful book put out by, I think it's the National Geographic. Actually, it's within their imprint called Artisans Books. And it's just a beautiful book of early photography by explorers. So it goes to the heart. It's nice to see what people were doing long before I arrived. And some of the photos are more contemporary, but it's got photos that may not even exist today, you know, locations that are forever changed. So I like looking at some of the historical photos in that book. A friend of mine, Greg Gorman, has...
I do want to
What?
ask you, because there, to go a little slow, because people are appreciating, and I'm going to say Rick Peterson, 63, is photographers supporting other photographers. That's very cool.
Really? Fantastic, Rick. Thank you for tuning in today. So this book, yeah, I mean, it's filled with lots of books, and it's really interesting to see what was being taken in the late 1800s, early 1900s, of places I've been. So for me, it's an interesting thing, and to see, I don't know, there's a lot of photos just that I would have never experienced in my life. So that is a great resource and just an interesting book to look at.
That is super cool. By the way, you're one more fan, Images by Gretchen. And I remember Images by Gretchen. If you're hearing me, I think we have called out on you in the past. Says your librarian buddy approves. So I was like, she's a librarian buddy approves. So that's good.
Yeah.
People approve and endorse your collection.
Yeah, you know, in the time of isolation, people should be looking at books.
That's good. We'll get to that later. I have a question for you in the end.
Okay.
On behalf of your fans. Okay.
Okay.
Keep going.
Greg Gorman is a photographer that's his hallmark is photographing Hollywood celebrities over the years. He was the guy to go to, is the guy to go to if you need a great shot of yourself for publicity. He has a studio on Wilshire Boulevard in LA, and over the years he's just been a great buddy of mine. He's got a ton of books. Inside Life is one of his favorites and one of my favorites, and it's just amazing. You know, he's like Mapplethorpe. If they're good at portraiture, they're good at everything, and so is Greg, and just a great, great guy.
You know, it's interesting. I got to read a comment here. Speaking of books, Jim Breaker, I apologize if I'm not pronouncing your name right, but said something interesting is, do you anticipate something replacing photo books? Because we've had the internet for a decade, and yet we are still here collecting books for curation. I guess his point is, isn't it nice to have books to see something, you know, physical and tangible? You
know what's happening, for the longest time, I think, books were just overly produced. Anybody that had an idea, publishers were eager to do it. There were a lot of low-quality books, paper-wise, printing-wise. Actually, the vision of the photographer wasn't all that great, and the book market crashed. And in more recent years, I would say in the last 10 years, there's been a resurgence. It's a smaller audience, but it's an audience that really, like myself, appreciates really well-crafted books. And we have better printing technologies these days. There's a bunch of books way over there in a huge shelf that are too big to put in these shelves. And so there are very large volumes. Taschen is one of the publishers that's doing these huge volumes. It's so big you have to have a stand to put it. But it says volumes for the fact that there is still a strong book market. It may not be as big as it used to be, but people still prefer looking at photos on a well-printed page with quality paper than on the internet looking at a book, e-books, so to speak.
Yeah.
You know, it's e-books are a great way to peruse a lot of photos in a short time, but there's not that connection.
Yeah, that is so true. That is so true.
And as I said earlier, I like to sit here, feel the book, look at the book, pace myself, and just have that tangible texture and everything else. Even the smell of the print is part of the whole process.
I agree, and in fact, that's the comment from Deborah. Is what a lovely place that you have here. So
I've made a little paradise. I mean, I said this last week. If you want to be an artist, live like an artist. I have, everywhere I look, every view from this house, this old house, out to the garden, out to the ravine, out to the water, uplifts my spirits. And so I operate on a fairly high degree of energy and happiness from the world I've actually created.
Before we go to the next book, a quick love from Brazil from Renata Moeta. I hope I didn't butcher that name, just like Art butchered my last name.
I didn't even attempt it, actually.
Yeah, Art, you're one of the reasons why I fell in love with photography.
Wow. Thank you, Renata.
That is
That
awesome.
is such a nice, really a nice comment.
And a different one is from Photo Smithy 15, love your books. In fact, speaking of your books, that's probably something that we should talk about as well. But we'll get to that later. Why don't you talk about the next set of books that inspire you from your Final Plus collection?
I mean, once you start looking at books and you start talking about people and other photographers, people say, oh, have you collected Irving Penn? And I started looking at Irving's work. He's long since departed our planet, but wow, what a volume of work he's done. And I've got 3 or 4 of his books, Irving Penn, by Irving Penn. He was a photographer that did a lot of Vogue magazine covers. He was a studio photographer, but he also went to New Guinea and photographed mudmen and other tribes in an age where nobody was traveling there. And so he went there, and he brought a colleague along, an assistant along, and I'll talk about that assistant towards the end of this. But at any rate, Irving Penn is something worth looking at. Really, you find their work probably on Amazon, but there's a lot of old bookstores, Powell's in Portland, Elliott Bay in Seattle, Tattered Cover in Denver, and in New York there's many collecting type bookstores. So if you want books and build a collection, start that way. But Amazon's a great way to hunt down books that you don't have time to find. So that's another one.
What we could do, Art, if you're up for it, is put the list of these books just on your website, so people, if they want to go get it, you know, they can.
Absolutely.
In this time of, you know, quarantine.
No, we're going to put this list on our website so people can do it, because there's some books that I've lent out that are not back. And one of the books that isn't a picture book, although there are a few black and whites, is the book called The Arabian Sands. And it was written by Wilfred Thesiger, and he traveled into the empty quarter of Arabia back in between 1945 and 50 and wrote about his experiences. And it's just a marvel to see this gentleman who was born in Addis Ababa to British parents, probably worked for the State Department, and he just had this zest for travel. And he chose Arabia, and then he later wrote a book called The Marsh Arabs, which Saddam Hussein annihilated when they drained the swamp. You know, so at any rate, that's a great read. And another one is by a personal friend of mine, Tom Hornbein, and it's called The West Ridge, and it's a harrowing account of Tom's climb of Mount Everest on the year that Jim Whittaker on the same expedition went up and climbed first American step on the summit of Mount Everest. Tom Hornbein and Willie Unsold both climbed up the backside and summited and overnighted on the summit, and he wrote a book. So The West Ridge, published by the Sierra Club, is an amazing account of that. And again, if you collect books and you're into nature and travel, this is a must-have. The West Ridge by Tom. And Tom's 89 years old, lives in Colorado now. He's a surgeon and a friend.
That is phenomenal. It just occurred to me. I mean, what a new world the books open up to us all.
Yes.
Things
Yeah,
like-
I mean, I love. Well, here's one of the books that I really liked.
Before that,
Okay.
I have a really interesting comment
Okay.
from Paul McCammon. I think I did better justice than once again, your pronunciation of my last name. Journeys to the Edge was so inspiring for me. Here's what's interesting about this. It's made me a better photographer, sure. Also a better person. That's interesting. Do you think photography makes people a better person?
Oh, definitely. I think photographers experience a place, a culture on a very different level than the average traveler. Photographers become voyeurs. We observe other people. We see the nuances of other people's behavior. And the more you witness, the more you get into that culture. And you do feel like you are part of the overall scheme. I find after 40 years of travel that we have so much more common throughout the world than we have as divisive issues. So people that travel like I have a much better, more uplifting view of our fellow man than somebody that may only travel throughout their own state. I've heard people say, oh, why would I ever travel? There's more of the United States than I ever will see. Or they don't even leave their own state. And I would find that completely opposite my point of view, because we are not on this planet very long, and it's a tiny globe out there in the sea of black. And I get the fact that travel is for privileged people. You can save up money. You don't have to spend a lot of money to drive into Mexico, for instance. I'm probably getting over my head, but my belief is if you can afford to travel, do so. Go see other cultures. Go have culture shock. The first time I went to India, everything was so very different than what I was used to. And I thrive on culture shock because it lights the fire under you from a perspective of creativity. If I went up to Mount Everest or Mount Rainier, oh my God, I think I need a little more tequila.
Go for your tequila. What you're saying is, when we are post-COVID and quarantine, in the meantime, there are books to take us to different distant lands, but at the right time, go get outside a fucking bubble.
I wouldn't say bubble because I find that word offensive.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
No, I don't. Anyway, yeah, the point I wanted to say is culture shock actually just creates, if you see everything time after time and they become familiar, it becomes very hard to be creative. For instance, just in January, I was down to Antarctica, and that's my 20th time down to Antarctica. And everything's really familiar. But our technology now is different than even a couple of years ago, the last time I was down there. And so I was reliant on technology enabling me to get shots I might not have been able to get just 2 years ago. But if all technology was the same and you kept going back to Mount Rainier or the Grand Canyon or, it's really hard to create something new. So I have always traveled to find new inspiration. And that's the word I've been looking for this last 3 minutes. New inspiration is exactly what I was looking for.
I have a support. Someone said bubble is offensive, fucking not. Anyway.
Oh, they got that.
Banter aside, yes, I agree with that comment.
I was actually making a joke. I think it went right over your head.
That's
but,
okay. I have low IQ. I get it. Keep going. What more books do you have in mind?
Well, Sebastian Salgado is a photographer's photographer. I mean, and this guy's out of Brazil. He's got Genesis. He's got Workers. He's got a bunch of books. But this particular volume, called Gold by Taschen, is all about the workers in Brazil and a mine in the interior of Brazil. And it's just epic. It's all black and white. He shoots black and white. But all the photos look like they're out of the Bible. It's all really larger than life, and the struggle of humans working in very degraded environments. And so many of the photos show people like insects. They're all struggling to haul up whatever they're mining out of this muddy pit, and the whole book is filled with that. And I look at it, it's like, I want to be there. I want to be there documenting the drama and the sheer expanse of humanity. That's a great
book. In fact, that's a question that came up here. Speaking of a black and white book, have you considered a black and white book?
I have considered everything, and it's probably down the road. Certainly, as I go forward, more and more black and white is finding its way into my books as an element of design. I don't know if that I would do an entire book on black and white, because it really takes photographers that are dedicated to the craft of working in dark rooms and doing the same thing that Ansel Adams was doing. You can use Nick's software, which renders color images into black and white in a beautiful way. But I think it's a genre of work that's dedicated to people that are just total in love with black and white. I'm still a colorist. I was a colorist as a painter. But I see elements of black and white populating my books as I go forward, because it's a design element I would like to incorporate.
Have you met Sebastião Salgado?
No, I haven't.
Would you like to?
Oh, of course. The thing is that people like me are on the road constantly. So I'm not one that goes to conferences or hangs out with people. It's amazing how few people I actually know, because I'm driven by my own competition. I'm the hardest on myself, right? I think compulsive people become that way. And so there's so much work I want to do and so little time left to do it. Don't get me wrong, I think that I'll be working for another 20 years.
Yes.
Barring whatever. But there's so much I want to do.
That is well said. In fact, on that note, I'm just going to read out one comment from Deborah. Thanks, Deborah, for joining us. Deborah K. Law-Eder, if I'm pronouncing that right. Travel, the relationship it forges, and the understanding it helps us to gain, enriches the soul. I think it's very well said.
Oh, I totally agree.
Thank you, Deborah.
I feel so privileged that I know people in countries all around the world. I think that's a great thing. Think about that. And that's a uniquely modern thing. COVID spread around the world because we get on jets and suddenly everybody's got the same affliction. But also, jet travel and world travel is so accessible today. And I think one of the questions came in from a fellow photographer saying we do have a huge footprint on the earth by traveling by jets. And I totally agree with that. I happen to think that we do more good than damage by talking about environmental issues, talking about wildlife and where they live. And I give talks all through Europe. I'll be giving talks in Mumbai, India, coming up next year. So I think on whole, world travel, we have a huge footprint on the earth, but being witnesses to what's out there is more important, or at least in my mind, it's more important to be out there talking about the environment, talking about places, talking about cultures at risk. The very second book I ever did was called Endangered People, and it looked at cultures throughout the world and where their respective governments were harming their own populations. So, you do what you do, and I cannot not travel because of that.
There's a common theme in your comments from your fans is, why don't we travel so much? And again, this is probably the wrong time to ask that question, but it's a good question at the right time.
What's the question again?
Is why don't we Americans travel more?
Well, I think the percentage of Americans that have passports are pretty low. But as a population of travelers, Americans, Japanese, and Germans, I think, are the biggest travelers on the planet.
Okay, there you go. That's good. Quick question. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit.
Okay.
Question from Victor. My friend Victor, I'm going to butcher your last name, Chahin. His question is, do you know Arquem Alcantara as a photographer from Brazil? He has amazing nature books. Arquem Alcantara.
I do not know. I would love that name to be actually emailed me so I could look up his work.
Victor, we got a job for you, my friend. Please email what we should look at, and again, really appreciate you your suggestion here.
Thank you, Victor.
Okay, what else on books?
Well, I've got a couple left.
Okay, let's do it.
All right. Let me make sure I've covered some of the ones I wanted to talk about. Yeah, I have. African Ceremonies by Angela Fisher and Carol Beckwith, but I've got all their books. Amazing women that chose Africa and to go into cultures and remote cultures, and traveling as two women at the time they started is pretty amazing. So very intrepid, very successful, very artistic, very inspirational. Manufactured Landscapes by Edward Pertinsky, a Canadian photographer, looked at degraded environments, but with a decidedly artistic eye. He's not making a political statement by the work. He's recording it almost with a cold perspective, not making a positive or negative statement, but nonetheless beautifully done and original, and a book I had to have. So Manufactured Landscape.
That's an interesting book.
Yeah. And it was published by the Canadian, what was it, the National Gallery of Canada.
What is on the cover?
It is toxic chemicals coming out of the earth. Bright red, beautifully produced, awful, unnatural disaster.
That is so interesting. In fact, landscapes and manufactured, you wouldn't quite put those two words together, but I think that's a testament for photographers being true artists, that they can see things that otherwise people don't see.
Yeah, think of rock quarries where we've cut marble out of the earth and left big holes that are filled with water. You know, man has created some amazing landscapes, both negative and positive, and in the Pathways to Creativity, which I'm about to release, I photographed this area of southern China and northern North Vietnam with 1,000-year-old rice terraces, and the entire landscape has been altered by through the hundreds of years, centuries, and it's extraordinarily ornate, very delicate as the water is filling the rice terraces, but all man created. And in his particular case, he's photographing degraded environments, but as landscapes. And when I teach abstract art, I'm taking degraded environments like rust and peeling paint and old cement factories and turning them into abstract expressionist art. So it's a different slant on what he's done, but I admire somebody that's got an idea, that executes it, gets it published, and beautifully produced. So that's my take on that.
That's wonderful. We have still one more book, but I'm going to ask you one question.
I better drink a little more tequila then.
Drink a tequila, because this is a personal question again, and it's from Lalit Deshmukh. Lalit, you are a lucky person today, and Lalit's question is, Art, this is a personal question. Did your parents know when you were really, really young that you would be one of the most inspiring artists, and that's why they named you Art?
You know, my grandfather's name was Arthur Richard Wolfe. My father's name was Richard Arthur Wolfe, and then I got Arthur Richard Wolfe. So we're not original folks. But it was not until I was probably 13 or 14 that my friends I was hanging out with abridged Arthur to Art. You know, the first three letters of Arthur is Art. And so people often ask that question, whether it's a made-up name, and I often respond, no, my real name is Melvin Pickles, but in fact, yes, it's Arthur Richard Wolfe. But I will say this on my parents, that they must have recognized something in me, because when I was 7 years old, I said this a couple weeks ago, they trained me to take a bus downtown and go up onto another part of our city through buses to a school for families that could not afford to put their children in art school. And so they saw my love of art at an early age, and they encouraged that. And so I really have always appreciated my parents for letting me be who I am. They never were judgmental, or even when I was 12 years old and my mom taught Sunday school in Congregational Church, I was confirmed in the church when I was 12 years old, and she turned to me and she said, now Arthur, you're 12 years old, you're an adult, you can choose to go to church or not. And that's amazing to me.
That is amazing.
And I said, thank you, Mom. Goodbye. So they gave me the freedom. And my mother's parents, who I knew very well, came out of Edinburgh, Scotland. So my mother parents came out of Scotland and immigrated to Vancouver, Canada, and then they moved to the States. My mother was the only girl with 4 brothers and born and raised, in Seattle.
Lalit, hope that answers that question. Here's my answer. I just made it up.
Okay.
Lalit, I'm assuming, is Indian with that last name, Deshmukh. The answer, in India is big into astrology. So this story, I'm going to make it up. Your parents were traveling with you in India. They met some strange astrologers and they said, oh my God, this boy has this hill on his head. He's going to become a big famous artist one day. Please name him something to do with art. And that's how they named you. Lalit, that's a real story, trust me.
You know what? You know the expression, don't drink the Kool-Aid? You're drinking the tequila, but it's just as effective. And you can tell that he's the director of marketing for Xbox. He's always got that marketing side to him.
I'll sell stories, whether they're real or not. Okay, so number one, and I'm sure it's very hard for you to pick one book, but if there's one book right now at this time you would pick, what would that be?
Well, it's actually the book that I've always held up as such an impressionable book. I was staying with a friend in New York City, this is good 30 years ago, and I saw this book on her shelf, and it was called Man is Art. And Martha Hill is her name, actually. And so this book, Man is Art, was Martha's book, and I was able to buy this through Amazon, and it's just a beautiful book. And as it turned out, Malcolm Kirk was Irving Penn's assistant. So he went with Irving Penn to New Guinea, and then Malcolm Kirk fell in love with New Guinea and kept going back and back again and produced this amazing book on body art of the Highlanders of New Guinea, which inspired me, which inspired the book Tribes, which I later produced. So, as I said before, people inspire me, I inspire other people, and that's the way cultures evolve. All cultures evolve, and it's usually having people like me pass it on to other people that will pass it on again.
That's wonderful. In fact, there's a common theme here that I think people are picking on, is that all these books are not just about pretty pictures. No. There's something a lot deeper. So tell us about, why these 10 books? What's common between all of them?
Well, I think in this particular case, I had never seen humans photographed quite like that. And it was like landscapes. These are landscapes of the face. And I thought the way he went about it was extraordinary and so professional. And this was published. This was first published, I think, in 1980. I was like 3 years out of college when this book was produced. And so I had no idea people lived like this in New Guinea, and then I had to go. And so when I finally when I was working on endangered people, I went into the highlands of Irian Jaya, which is on the same island as Papua New Guinea, and I started photographing people, but it was inspired by this.
That's cool. So it does...
Almost every idea, every book I ever did has an inception of an idea based on something that I've seen or experienced or saw of somebody else. And the idea then is to take your own idea forward, not to, try to make an identical copy, but to bring it forward in your own vision. And so that's how books evolve. That's cool. But we'll talk about that next week, I think.
Question for, again, everyone on Facebook and Instagram. Are you guys having fun? And should we go a little bit over if you are okay with that? Because I do want to hit up on some questions that we got.
Sure.
Please let us know with your comments and loves and likes that, this is cool.
I'm always having fun. I actually look forward to this every week. I actually get out of my pajamas and get into a shirt and pants for the first time, the only time during the week.
Okay, that is actually good to know. That is good to know.
And nothing I say is actually true.
I think you're becoming a marketing guy. Anyway, question on Facebook from Chris Durbin. And before I ask the question, I do want to say that yes, the camera angle on Instagram is probably a little better. And for everyone hearing us, it's a little challenging for us to keep both, while maintaining social distancing. So we're trying our best. But Instagram, yes, does tend to have a better camera angle. So if we're able to, Instagram is probably a better way. But if you're not able to, we will try to support Facebook as much as we can. So we do appreciate the patience that you guys are showing.
And we are in a small room.
And
that's the truth of the matter too.
Question from Chris Durbin. Chris' question is, would any of the books you own which is the 500 plus books, surprise us? I'm intrigued by this question.
Of that,
There you go, we got
of
it.
that, I'm
Yes.
certain.
Okay, I'm certain, okay.
But did you not say that we someday will do an after hours tequila with Art?
No comments.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure there's some books that may surprise or even shock you. But you know, you saw my penis collection all the way already up there last week, so maybe not so much.
Okay, Chris, I think you got your answer is from the penis connection. You know, you can conclude whatever you want, Chris. And I will conclude whatever I want as well.
It's not that this is an X-rated room. How old are you, Anthony, by the way?
30.
30. I got pimples on my ass older than 30.
I think the tequila is doing its magic.
We are.
Okay.
After dark starting.
Let's do this. One last question, and I know. So these are all books from people who whose work you admire. Obviously, we didn't talk about your books. Question to everyone on Instagram and Facebook: would you like the next episode to be Art's own books and kind of how he went about that journey of his own books? Let's say his top 10 books, and in fact, you have what 100 plus books.
You know,
That's crazy. You're a crazy man. 100 plus books.
I don't count books. I don't count countries. I don't count the days I'm traveling. I'm not a counter of things, But the women that have worked with me, there's 2 women, hi Chris and Deirdre, they have worked for me for 30 freaking years.
That
And
is
they're tired of it.
amazing. I think I appreciate them so much. 30 years is a long time.
30 years each. Their husbands have given them to me. At any rate, they did the counting, and those 115 or whatever books represent foreign imprints, children's books, books that are long out of print. But yeah, I mean, some years I was doing like 6 books a year, which publishers didn't necessarily like because they want to know this is the only book you're thinking about for the next 4 years. But that's not the case.
So,
Fortunately, now I'm with one publisher out of San Rafael, California, and he is great. His whole aesthetic is the same as mine, and we collaborate, and it's a marriage made in heaven.
okay, I have a question for the audience. Please put a number on your comments. How many books you got, have of Art? And we'll, is it 1, 2, 4, 5 plus, 10 plus, 20 plus? Anyone has more than 10 plus? I'd love to know personally how many has 10 of your books. So that's
We would
the
call
question.
those stalkers.
We would call those fans. In
Do I
marketing
look
terms.
more intelligent with glasses on?
So
Gabrielle,
yes.
that was a
Okay,
strong
let's see.
tequila this
5. There's 5. There's 10. There's more. Yeah. There's lots of books. How about this? Would you be open, Art? 14. Oh my God. There's someone with 14. That's a stalker.
That's
Jim,
cool.
you're a
That's-
stalker.
Okay, well, we
At
like
15.
stalkers.
Yes, 15. 3
We
or
like you,
4.
Jim.
Yeah,
Thank
3
you.
or 4. Someone who said 3 or 4. Please go and count properly. 3 or 4. Thank you very much. Anyway, question for you, Art.
Yeah.
Let's do. Are you up for it? In fact, it's not even a question. It's a volunteering told.
Volunteering.
Voluntold is the new millennial term. It's like we're gonna sort of ask you, but not really. You just have to do it because
What-
your fans
what is
want it.
What is it?
Voluntold is the term.
Speak like an adult.
Voluntold. Anyway, what it
All right.
means is next time let's do an episode on just your books
Okay,
and perhaps think about how you want to do it. But that's what
perfect.
people would love.
No, I would love to do that.
And along with the top 10, maybe your books, and if there's one that really is a standout for you for whatever reason, I think people would enjoy finding out why.
I can find 10 out of 100 and actually make them look good.
Okay, I think we would love that. We would
Okay.
love that.
My 10 favorite books then.
10 favorite books.
Okay.
Sounds like a plan?
Should we sit in a different place next week just to break
Maybe.
things up?
Sure. You decide. It's your home.
All right.
You decide the place, and let's do it next time. Any final questions or thoughts for your audience, for your fans?
Well, last week I said if you want to be an artist, I said actually listen to me. If you want to be an artist, live like an artist. But this week I think listen to me. Buy books. I mean, buy books that inspire you and look at them and see what other painters or photographers are doing and just learn you don't have to take an expensive course or travel the world to learn. So get a book. Treat yourself to one book. And look at that book and see what that woman or that man did with their work, and try to emulate it initially, and then grow it from that seed onto your own body of work. That's what we did actually as art students. We would pick a painter that we loved and try to emulate their work. And I picked Claude Monet. And I remember doing oil paints, and I hated paints. Actually, really quick, I hated oil paints. It was too slow to dry. I loved watercolors because it was almost like taking pictures, you know. A couple of minutes later, the paint was dry. I can remember my parents coming home, and I was living at home at the time, and I had the oven on, and I had an oil painting in the oven trying to dry the oil. And the entire house reeked of linseed oil and oil paint. So oil paints weren't my forte, but Claude Monet was. And so I tried to emulate his work. But that's what I would say. Buy a book, treat yourself to a book, pour over it, look, and try to educate yourself on what that person was trying to do with their work, and use it as a starting. But really, lastly, it's not about whether you do a book or not. It's really the most important thing is, are you having fun? Is it lighting your fire? Are you having passion? This is it. The secret to longevity is passion and creativity. And it could be cooking, it could be dance, it could be writing, it could be poetry, it could be painting or photography.
Beautiful. On that note, thank you, Art, and thank you everyone on Instagram and Facebook. See you same time next Thursday.
Cheers.
Cheers.